we're going to talk about fucking swearing. So, I think it was in LinkedIn News maybe this week. Forgive me, I'm looking on my second screen, so I'll be reading a couple bits. According to, this was a day or so ago, according to UK employment judge, Andrew whatever, swearing no longer provides any shock value at work, apparently. A couple of bits and pieces of research in here also says academics in the UK and Sweden have actually found that using obscenities can improve social bonding and ease stress. I read something else in the Financial Times that's related to this that says foul language can boost group bonding, raise pain tolerance, and increase physical strength, apparently. But obviously all this is framed, the fact that it was on LinkedIn, it's all framed around in the workplace. There's also, again, without just bloody reading everything that's in front of me here, there was an unfair dismissal case that went to this judge, employment judge, and apparently the F-bomb was dropped in an internal meeting between two colleagues. The colleague that was, I think it was unrelated, has actually been successful in that unfair dismissal case. She was dismissed and it's a successful case, but one specific detail in that whole case was about her boss, I think, or her colleague in that meeting used the F-bomb. Now, I don't know whether that person swore at her using the F-bomb or it was just in that meeting, it was said in that meeting, but there's loads and loads of stuff that I've been reading all about swearing, good, bad, ugly, whatever, in the workplace. What do you think about it? Obviously, marketing agency is stereotypical, isn't it? I'm going to say it. It's like this cool, bloody relaxed place, blah, blah, blah. What are your thoughts? Do you have any unique thoughts as an employer as to swearing in the workplace, or do you not give a fucking shit?
Well, I think first of all, if it were a thing, I'd be fucked because I swear all the time.
There it is.
I think there's a big difference between being in a position where you're in a meeting with someone, if it's performance related or an issue related meeting, whereby you're using it in a personal way, like saying you're a fucking idiot. That is different to passing conversation where you just use it, because it's part of my vocabulary. It's a really hard one to think about because I swear probably way too much. I get told off by my missus all the time for letting it slip out in front of the little girl, so I will be 100% responsible for her first swear word.
Yeah, someone's got to be. I'm similar. In the workplace, it's a bit of a weird one for me because relaxed environment, be yourself, all that sort of stuff. I totally agree with you about if it became personal. That's, personally a way to either describe someone behind the back or to the face and almost use as an attack. That's a totally different ball game. All these headlines and research and all this sort of shit is obviously not going to be accounting for that sort of stuff, because surely we're all on the same bloody page that if you're calling someone a fucking idiot, like, for example.
It's context, isn't it? I use plant pot quite a lot. And I that's one of my favourite insults. I'm like, you fucking plant pot. Is that, where's the line? I think it comes down to context, doesn't it? It's not, as long as it's not being directed in a negative way where you're attacking the other person, then I don't see a problem. Does anyone have a problem with it? Is everybody not used to swearing? Is it, as an adult in this day and age,
there's this other bit. I know I said I wouldn't read every single line of research that's been referenced in this overall story, but sort of slightly falling outside of work in the workplace, there's another thing here that says the data seems to agree, blah, blah, blah. According to TV and radio regulator Ofcom, only 1% of the complaints it received in 2021 were swearing related. So I think that was just boosting that story that swearing is just a non-event now. So to your point there, most people just think it's a non-event really now. The only thing, I guess, pulling it back to what we normally talk about and the name of this podcast, what about in like pitch situations. Like, I guess me and you were talking there, and you tell me if you were thinking differently, but I felt like what we were talking about there was a little bit more sort of internally looking, you know, amongst your colleagues, meetings, catch-ups, blah, 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 general conversation. But what about when it goes external? So you're speaking to people that you don't work with every single minute of the day.
I think bringing it back to a pitch situation, I think I've probably swore in a pitch where if I'm passionate about something in that moment, because it's almost, whether it's right or wrong, it's almost built into my vocabulary as something that probably slips out when I'm emphasizing a point or I'm passionate about what I'm talking about. So I guess, yeah, it doesn't... I wouldn't walk away from a pitch situation thinking, oh, shit, I shouldn't have sworn in there.
Yeah.
Unless it was a super specific audience where it potentially might cause offence. But I don't have an example of what that might be.
So my example of what that might be, to use where your sort of line of thought was there, is probably my dad. So he's worked in financial services, heavily regulated, obviously, industry for years and years and years. And I'm not saying that I'm not sort of broad brushstroke in that industry as a whole, that you can't swear in it. That's not where I'm going here. But I do remember when we first published this podcast, and Polly will tell you as well, obviously, when she publishes an episode recording, she has to mark it as explicit. Now, that's slightly, we're going off, I know, we're going off. We're going off that as a slight tangent here, but I guess the reason why you'd probably have to do that is because, within reason, that's a public platform, kids could access it, blah, blah, blah. I get that. But what my dad specifically picked out when he'd listened to one or two of our first episodes, he picked up on our swearing. And I can't remember how he phrased it, but I know where he was coming from. His career, years and years in his career, has been financial services. He's older than you and I, so he's done it, you know, when it was probably even more stiff and corporate than it is now. The fact that he picked up on a podcast from his son, that his son's involved in, and one of the first things was, you know, it's great, but how do you get away with that swearing? It was something like that. I wonder whether that's an audience maybe in a pitch scenario where I'd think twice, and maybe it might not even be a conscious effort, but I wonder if I'd either dial it down, my swearing, or at least the frequency of swearing, or it just wouldn't come out, and it'd be a consideration going into that in front of that audience. I don't know. That's only speaking from my experience, really.
I think you read the room, don't you? I think you know subconsciously if it's going to offend someone.
Mm.
You can tell whether the people in a room in a pitch situation are stiff or not.
Yeah. What about the whole thing of be yourself, represent who you are, your values and all? Well, values is obviously, I'm not saying you value swearing, but valuing being yourself and being who we are, relaxed agency, and representing yourself as is. Where does that fit in?
I do value swearing. I genuinely think there are situations where there is no better word than a swear word to emphasise the point that you're making.
I like the passion thing you said. We've talked about that before, haven't we?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, it just makes sense. I don't know, it's just built in. Like I say, I would struggle to think of a situation where I've walked away from a pitch and thought, oh no, I shouldn't have said that in there.
It's weird though, because I'm not sure. I think by default, I do tone it down in a pitch situation. And I wonder if it's more formal versus a more informal setting, the context thing. I wonder if it's just a bit of an autopilot. I don't know it's there, but I'm going into that pitch, regardless of the audience, with a little bit more of this is a bit more of a formal process and meeting compared to my day-to-day chat with Polly, who I sit next to. That sort of example.
I think that will definitely come into play more than you will realise, for sure. But
yeah,
and don't get me wrong, I wouldn't want to leave a situation where I'm meeting someone for the first time and then their impression of me be, fucking hell, he's a potty mouth. Do you know what I mean? I would rather them pay more attention to the purpose of why we're there in the first place. But yeah, it's just and you're speaking to the wrong person, I think.
Yeah, well, I agree. A few people in my life outside of work pick up on the frequency at which I swear. But like, I'm just rereading that thing that I mentioned right at the start. In the UK and Sweden, academics have actually found that using swear words can improve social bonding and ease stress. I think I get where that's sort of coming from. The improved social bonding, though, I'd go back to a word you used 10 minutes ago, 5 minutes ago, whatever. Context. Like you can't just say swearing in front of people you might not know as well as your colleagues, for example, i.e., an audience that you're pitching to. You can swear like you ordinarily would, and that's going to improve a social bonding. You could have 5 people in the room in front of you, and one person in their mind just goes in the mind, "Oh, I don't like that." Do you know what I mean? Like, I know that these studies are based on majority and stats that way, but swearing improving social bonding, I don't know. It's quite a headline, that.
I think that's probably in the context of social situations where you might be with a group of friends rather than where we're referencing meeting situations. But then I would hope that you would be yourself in front of that group of friends anyway, so I can see where the correlation might come.
Do you reckon if there was ever an experience, a pitch, for example, where one or some of us have used an obscenity, effed and jeffed in the pitch, and we haven't won it? And I'm not saying this has happened. It might just be a hypothetical or in the future. Do you reckon anyone would ever collar us for that? I.e., say they went with a different agency for other reasons or whatever, but one of their bits of feedback. Do you think we'd ever hear that as feedback from a potential client? And we really didn't like the fact that you all swore at different points in that pitch, for example.
I can't imagine receiving that as feedback and giving any other response than the fuck.
Fuck off. Obviously, we wouldn't do that, but yeah, it's interesting. My experience of being in financial services, when I worked for the banks in marketing, that's an interesting one, because that was back in 2014, so nearly 10 years ago, and I definitely think I was a little bit more careful, and I wonder if my little story about my dad and where his career sits, and that comment about, "Oh, you swear on your podcast," because me and my dad are in the pub and we're swearing, just like we do at Flaunt, sort of thing. But yeah, I think about 10 years ago when I was working in that bank, I think I would have been a bit more careful than I am. So maybe it's your surroundings as well.
I think there's probably a generational shift to consider as well. Like, I would argue that people that are currently around about the 25-ish mark are a lot more desensitized to swearing than people who are 55, for example, because the content that they're exposed to and the access to information is a lot more widespread than it was for the older generation. So I think it's like violence, for example, in video games. It's normality.
Yeah.
It's the same sort of concept as swearing. I think it's so much more widely used and mainstream when you look at what people consume and where they live and how they spend their time, that it's almost desensitized people to that.
I wonder, it'd be quite interesting to see agencies' websites and how they talk about themselves 10, 15, 20 years ago versus now, and how how popular and commonplace swear words are in those same descriptions of an agency that might still be around now versus 10, 15, 20 years ago. Because I bet 1 every 2 agencies has a swear word somewhere when they're talking about themselves. Just who we are. It's who we fucking are.